but you are able to walk among those people. You're able to participate in society. You're able to have totally different relationships than what you had before. Before, your life was simply this: I need money. Can I have some money? Please help me. I can't see. I need some money. And then you have a totally different relationship with people. How can I help you? Is there a way that I can be of help with you? How can I live with you? I'm no longer excluded or put aside, but I'm a part of. And I wonder how many of us feel like that blind man, not worthy, not welcome, not a part of, who, when Jesus comes to us, says exactly that same thing: come and be a part of life. Live life to the fullest. We hear just the next chapter from John. What does that mean? How does that change your life? Now let me ask another question of you all. What is the bigger miracle? Eyesight for this blind man, or a new way of understanding sin and punishment? What's the bigger miracle that happens in this story? What do you think? Go ahead, you can talk. You have to think about it. Yeah, it's like an auctioneer. I saw a hand go. You win. I wonder if the bigger miracle is the gift of new eyes, the gift of healing, the gift of sight, or if that bigger miracle is a totally new way of understanding sin, punishment, life and death, illness and pain. You as the Pharisees, now we turn to you. What was your view of the blind man's situation? As you walked by him day after day, how did you view that blind man? Huh? Viewed him as nothing? Okay? Alright? Viewed him as someone who needed to stay out of the way, literally. Okay? Okay? What else? Okay? Unworthy. Okay? Unworthy why? Okay? Alright? Couldn't help, couldn't participate, couldn't be a part of society, so it was just a nuisance. It was somebody that needed to stay out of the way. And in fact, because that correlation was made so clearly between sin and punishment, that you would have seen this blind man as a sinner, as he's getting what he deserves. He did something a long time ago, and he needs to relive that day after day after day. Let me ask you this question, you Pharisees, you keepers of the law. Would Jesus be more faithful to have kept the Sabbath, to kept the law, and not heal on the Sabbath? Would he have been more faithful? Jesus was a rabbi. He was a teacher of the law. Would he have been more faithful to have kept the Sabbath? Or was it more important for Jesus to heal the man? To heal. So I've been wrestling with this question for the last couple of weeks. I'll continue to wrestle with it. How many of us have rules, orders, policies, guidelines that tell us this is the way that we have to live, this is the way that we have to operate? I can only operate out of this confined, restricted sheet of paper that tells me what I'm supposed to do. What's more important? That sheet of paper or life? That man. Seeing an individual as a child of God, worthy of being not excluded but being included into the world. So I wonder how we as a church and how I as pastor and how you and I, as we live our lives, how do we make decisions like that? What trumps what is really one of the questions. Is it more important to keep the rule, or is it more important to care for the person? Alright, so now we get to the neighbors. I love the neighbors. I appreciate the neighbors because they are, like us, called to, in a lot of ways, decide. The neighbors are called to testify, called to give witness, called to share what they have seen. If you were the neighbor, how would this story, how would this occurrence, how would this healing have impacted you? How would that story have impacted you? You really are called to as neighbor, and I wonder if all of us are the neighbor in this story, called to decide. Called to either believe in this healing and believe in this healing and in this man who did this healing, or kind of chalk it up to another occurrence, chalk it up to another coincidence, chalk it up to something that just happened. You're really called, I wonder, to testify. If you had been the blind man's neighbor, how would this have impacted you? And I wonder, as people of faith, as we go about our lives, if we sometimes choose to just observe and see and watch and maybe sometimes marvel but not really get into it, or I wonder if sometimes as, like the neighbors, called to testify, called to witness, called to share, called to do something because this healing is so miraculous, because this thing that has happened is so extraordinary. So now we turn to the parents. If you were the parents of this man born blind, what would you have been afraid of? What are the things that you would have been afraid of if you were the parents?
That somebody would find the sin that caused your son to be born.
Oh! That somebody would actually point to that sin that you, Marcus, did when you were 16 years old, and because of that sin, you then had a son, and because of that sin, that son was born blind, and somebody might find out what you really did a long, long, long time ago, so you could be carrying a lot of guilt with you throughout your life. Okay? Parents are afraid of being found out. I like that. And I wonder if the parents too are worried about being thrown out of the synagogue, being thrown out of the faith community. They kind of pass the buck back to the son and say, well, ask him, he's of age, Please go to him. Don't ask us. Don't find us guilty. We want to stay in what we know, those policies, guidelines, those rules, what tells us right and wrong. We're going to stay in what we know. And it's the son who gets thrown out of that thing that they know. It's interesting, he gets thrown out of that synagogue community, but he gets thrown back into life. He gets thrown back into participating in this world. He gets thrown back into witness, sharing, testimony. He says a number of times. And then in the end he says, I want to believe in this man who has healed me. And Jesus says, it's the one you're talking to. It's me. Far too often, I am concerned that my life is simply just observation. That my life is just standing on the side of the road, watching the rest of the world go by, or my life is just simply in front of the TV watching the game. But I wonder if you and I are called to participate in the grace and in the love of God. Out of this text comes that wonderful phrase, I once was blind, but now I see. That phrase which John Newton picked up in the wonderful hymn, Amazing Grace. I'll tell you a little bit of a story that I learned this week about John Newton and that story, Amazing Grace. Apparently, John Newton, his mother died at a pretty early age, and because his mother died, he rejected the faith of his family. He rejected Christianity, right? And after living a long life of unfaith, found himself in the shipping industry, found himself eventually as captain of a slave trading ship. You know a lot of that story already. One of the accounts of that goes a little bit something like this, that there was a time when John Newton was drunk, was treating his crew and his cargo more than harshly, and in the midst of a storm was thrown overboard. And in seeing the ship continue on its course, really saw that his life needed to change. Now the crew was not so kind to him. Rather than stopping the ship or turning the ship around, well, you can't do that because it's a ship, right? It's moving. But rather than throwing a life preserver or somebody jumping in after him, what they did is they got out a whale's harpoon. And they threw or they shot this whale harpoon at John Newton, and they caught him in the hip. And they drug him back to the ship with a harpoon sticking out of his hip. And John Newton said that he walked with a limp the rest of his life as a result of that. And he equated that to being marked by God's grace, being given a second chance. I wonder if you and I have been called to be marked by God's grace. To be a participant then in the life of Christ. To share with others in our joy and in our sorrow, to beg to learn and to strive to learn more about this one, and then to serve others in the name of Christ, being marked with grace. Being called to participate in the life and death of Jesus Christ. Being called to partner with our friends in faith here and across the globe in serving others, in loving others, in empowering others, and knowing that we have been given a second chance. Knowing that we have gone to the pool and washed our eyes and are able to see. And are no longer set aside, no longer put aside, no longer looked at as unworthy, but we are included in, we are welcomed in, we are a participant in the life of faith. Where it's not just something that we observe. It's something that we play. It's something that we do. It's a way in which we live. Marked by the grace